All right, we'll get started. So today we're going to finish chapter 28. Just I think there's about 20 slides today, and then a walkthrough for the assignment. It's going to be more for your lab than actual lecture assignment. And then you're going to have a separate assignment due at the end of the week for the exam. Okay. And again, that's going to be a 5-point assignment that'll be uploaded to Canvas. It's not up yet, but it'll contain 2 questions from your exam, from exam 5. Okay, so I'll give you two of those questions on there will be verbatim going to be on the exam. So just like last time when I gave you those practice questions, they'll be the exact same ones. I'm not going to change anything, not even the wording. Okay, so I'm giving you 2 freebies on the exam. It's probably going to be those 10-point questions as well. So you're getting 20 free points as long as you complete the assignment. And yeah, I think that's it. So the exam number 5 will be on 25, 26, 27. And, oh, I'm sorry, exam 4 will be on, 25, 26, 27, and 28. So let me see 1 second. Great. Yeah, it'll be 25, 26, 27, and then half of 28. So what I give you today for 28 will be will not be on the exam. Okay, so the flowers and what I cover right now won't be on the exam. So first part of 28, but 25, 26, and 27 are going to be the majority of your exam. Okay, and you do have a quiz that's also due, I believe, by Friday. So make sure you get to that as well. One other thing, what else I need to talk about? Oh, yeah. So presentations and papers. I'm getting a lot of individuals that are emailing me not knowing what the paper or presentation is on. We should have started presenting already during lab time, but no one even signed up today. So there's still about a third of the class, from both of my classes, that still have not registered for the presentation. Okay, so if you do not register for the presentation, if you do not message me or email me saying that you're going to be signing up, or you need a special time because you have some work time conflicts or something to that effect, you need to let me know. Otherwise, you're going to lose 10 to 15% of your grade on the paper. Okay, so you need to talk to me ASAP if you still don't know what's going on. I had a couple of students over the weekend that just signed up. So the spots are running out fairly quickly. Let me see. So again, I'm just going to show that one more time. You're going to go to your section. It's going to be in week 13. So yeah, week 13, you have scheduled presentations. You're going to come and click the links, and they're going to get to the presentation. So again, there's still a considerable amount of people that have not signed up. So yeah, that's about 30 students. So there's still about a third of the class that needs to sign up. Okay. So this was today, the 30th. There was a lot of time slots that were missed. Okay. So all you have is December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd to sign up. And if you don't sign up, you're not going to have, you're not going to have a time slot. So you're not going to get those points. Okay. So please make sure you sign up, make sure you get those presentations done. Okay. Yeah, we'll get started. And then, today, so we're going to have 28, and then we're going to do a quick review of chapter 25, 26, and 27. 20 I just did last week, so that recording is ready to go for you guys. So I will not review that today. All right, so again, this information will not be on the exam. So life cycle of a flowering plant. So again, this is the second part of chapter 28. So there's a couple of things that we need to cover in terms of reproduction with plants. There's asexual versus sexual reproduction. Okay, so asexual reproduction is a creation of genetically identical offspring by a single parent without the participation of gametes, so sperm or egg. So again, this is almost going to be like budding or clones that are made from the organism. But there is a type of sexual reproduction that can occur with an organism that does have two types of gametes, and this is going to be done typically with tapeworms or cestodes. Okay, so you don't really see this in the plants, but for the most part, plants will essentially bud off or make an organism that's genetically identical, okay, to the parent. Okay. Sexual reproduction, again, the whole point of sex is to mix up the genetics, right? You're combining and changing the genetics enough to where you're going to have offspring that's genetically different or distinct from the parents, right? So the creation of genetically distinct offspring by the fusion of two haploid sex cells, so sperm and egg, okay? This is going to form a zygote, which is a fertilized egg, right? So again, we talked about mitosis and meiosis, and the formation or the forming of sex cells is done through meiosis, right? You have the diploid cells turning into haploid cells, which are going to be the sperm or the egg. Okay. And in plants, this is the same process in terms of on the cellular level, right? But you're going to have pollen, or you're going to have an ovule, or some sort of area where that pollen is going to fertilize that egg. Okay. And again, the fusion is very similar to what we would see with animals, or even swimming gametes and bryophytes, or those ferns. Okay. So fertilization, this is a union of haploid sperm cell with a haploid egg cell producing a zygote. Okay. So again, this is going to be when the sperm meets the egg. That's now a fertilized cell, right? The nucleus now has double or duplicate amounts of chromosomes, right? So it's diploid. All right. So some plants that produce asexually, here we have garlic. So the garlic bulb is actually undergone stem that functions in storage. So a single large bulb fragments into several cloves. Each clove can give rise to a new plant. Okay, so each of those little individual cloves can bud and sprout that plant, but this is all one single organism. Okay, so each bud can give rise to individual sprouts. Okay. Holly trees, these actually are extensions of the root system. So you see here, this tree is actually growing, but here you have the offspring protruding out of the root system, okay? And again, these are going to be genetically similar or identical to the parent, okay? And this is asexual reproduction. So creosote bushes, this is a ring of plants and a clone of creosote bushes in the Mojave Desert. So you see this area, these are all essentially genetically identical, right? These are all clones, right? They came from one single plant of origin, and then they're just growing or extending that way. So many fruits are made by asexual reproduction. Um, so believe it or not, navel oranges are actually uh, not able to be I guess fertilized. Okay, so navel oranges actually have to be grafted in order to have the fruits being produced. So they actually take the clipping or the cut of a navel orange tree, and then they glue it onto another stump of a different tree. Okay, and this is how they actually make navel oranges. It's called grafting. Okay, and again, if you ever looked at a navel oranges, the seeds are very small. The fruit is very large, but the ovum or that actual seed part of that fruit is underdeveloped. Okay, this is because there was a mutation that was discovered early on growing oranges, and that individual decided to graft that fruit onto other trees, and he found that it was successful at growing as long as it grafted to a different organism. Again, because it was unable to pass on or fertilize the fruit through conventional means. Okay. All right, the flower. So flower is in an angiosperm is a short shoot of four sets of modified leaves bearing structures that function in sexual reproduction. So you have a sepal. This is a modified leaf of a flowering plant. Um, a whorl of sepals encloses and protects the flower bud before it opens. You have a petal. This is a modified leaf of a flowering plant. Petals are the often petals are often colorful. That is a typo. I'm so sorry. Petals are the colorful part of the flower. It advertises to the insects that and other pollinators to come and actually visit that flower in order to have. I'm gonna fix that. Sorry. So again, these petals are going to advertise that there's pollen as well as some sort of sugar that's going to be there for the pollinators, right? The bees just don't come to the flowers just because there's pollen there. The bees don't really feed off of pollen, right? They're going to feed off of the sugar that's produced by that flower, okay? Stamen, this is a pollen-producing part of the flower, consists of a stalk, filament, and an anther. Anther is a sac in which pollen grains develop, located at the tip of a flower stamen. Carpel, the egg-producing part of the flower, consisting of a stalk with an ovary at the base and a stigma, which traps pollen at the tip. And we'll see this right now in the image. Stigma is the sticky tip of the flower, carpel that traps pollen. Ovary in flowering plants, this is the base of the carpel in which the egg containing ovules develop. And an ovule in a seed plant, a reproductive structure that contains the female gametophyte and the developing egg. An ovule develops into a seed. So this is what you'll see in the middle of fruit around the flesh, okay? So your assignment this week is to draw a flower. And so you're gonna need to label the different parts of the flower. So again, you have the anther, which contains the pollen, the filament, which has the extension holding the anther, and this will make up the male portion of that flower, okay, the stamen, okay? You have an ovule here, which is going to be containing, again, technically the seed or the ovum, which will house the female gametophyte. You have the stigma and the style. Again, the stigma is going to contain that sticky area that's going to be trapping the pollen, okay? And then the style is going to be that shoot that leads to the ovule, okay? And then you do have the ovary, which will make up the flesh of the this will make up the flesh of the fruit once the fruit develops, okay? Then you have the petal advertising to the pollinators and the sepal, okay? So you're going to need to draw a picture like this and upload it to Canvas, and I'll go over what the project is at the end, okay? So it's pretty simple, easy 10 points. So germinate is to initiate growth, as in a plant seed or a plant or a fungal spore. So again, germination is again when the seed finds a suitable environment to grow and sprout. And remember, there's two types of life stages within plants, right? So there's an alternation of generation. Okay, so the sporophyte is a multicellular diploid form in the life cycle of the organism undergoing alteration of generations, results from the union of gametes and mitotically produces haploid spores that grow into gametophyte generation. Okay, so remember the sporophyte and angiosperms is going to be all of the plants. Okay, so this is going to be the trees, the flowers, the grasses, whatever those organisms are, whatever those plants are. If they are angiosperms, they're going to all be sporophytes, right? Gametophyte, which is going to be the multicellular haploid form, does not exist technically in angiosperms, right? But it does exist in bryophytes and in ferns, okay? Remember with the swimming gametes. So the gametophyte is a multicellular haploid form in the life cycle of an organism's undergoing alteration of generations. It results from the union of spores and mitotically produces haploid gametes that unite and grow into the sporophyte generation. Again, the gametophyte in ferns or bryophytes, which are the mosses, they're going to be producing the spores or the haploid spores that are going to be forming or mixing together in order to make the actual sporophyte. Okay. So again, the gametophyte will produce the gametes or the swimming sperm or the eggs. Okay. So again, haploid is a gametophyte. Sporophyte is going to be containing the diploid, right? So you're going to have two pairs of chromosomes, okay? So the life cycle of an angiosperm. So again, you have this here. This is going to be, again, the sporophyte producing the male and female sex cells through meiosis, okay? So again, this organism is diploid, so it does have two copies of the chromosomes, okay? At least two copies of the chromosomes. There can be aneuploidy or a different amount of number of chromosomes because plants are weird, but in all intents and purposes, this is going to be diploid, okay? So it has two pairs of chromosomes. So again, this will be fertilized, this ovary containing the ovule, the fruit, so it's a mature ovary, so this contains a zygote. Again, this zygote will then either be consumed, or this fruit will be consumed, leaving the seed. The seed will then germinate. The germination will be a seedling, and this will be diploid as well. So the only things that are haploid is this anther and stamen containing the ovule or the ovary, okay, or the pollen, right? And there are protective measures that block the pollen from self pollinating. But there's one thing that we did talk about with Mendelian genetics was those pea plants, and they have covered. They do have covered flowers, which means they self pollinate. Okay, which is kind of different from most plants, but for most flowering plants, they do have protective measures in order to prevent the pollen from entering the stamen to self fertilize. Okay, because most times you don't want to do that, right? Because it can limit the genetic diversity that you're able to have. So, but pea plants are a little different. You can self pollinate. Okay. So pollination and fertilization. So pollen grain is a plant in a seed plant, the male gametophyte that develops within the anther of a stamen. Okay, it houses cells that will develop into sperm. Okay, so this is again the pollen grain. Embryo sac, the female gametophyte contained in the ovule of a flowering plant. Again, that's going to be at the bottom of that style, or at that bottom part of the flower, right in the center. Okay, pollination in seed plants, the delivery by wind or animals of pollen from the male pollen producing parts of the plant to the stigma of the carpel on the female part of the plant. So again, the stigma is going to be housing that ovule or that ovum. Okay. Endosperm in flowering plants is a nutrient-rich mass formed by the union of the sperm cell with the diploid central cell of the embryo sac during double fertilization. Provides nourishment to the developing embryo in the seed. So endosperm, again, this is going to be giving that seed or that fruit nourishment during the growth. Okay. So double fertilization in flowering plants, the formation of both a zygote and a cell with a triploid nucleus. This triploid nucleus, think of it as almost like the yolk or the food for that cell. Okay. So this develops into the endosperm, right? And this is going to be, again, food either for the fruit development or for that seed development. Okay. All right. So it's important to note that there are different developments within the tissues. So you have the anther, which contains a male gametophyte. Um, and then you do have the ovary or the ovum, which has the ovule, okay, which this turns into the fruit, okay. The anther, the cells within the anther, there's meiosis occurring, so you have 4 haploid spores. Again, this will be turned into the pollen grains, or develop into the pollen grains, okay, and this will be shed or dumped onto a pollinator or into the air. The ovule and the ovary are a little bit different, so meiosis occurs. You have cell development, the surviving cell is a haploid spore. Okay. And the only time this can be fertilized or be turned into a zygote is if a pollen granule lands in the stigma and it travels down and actually enters in and fertilizes the egg. So you have 2 haploid nuclei at the large center. This is again going to be the endosperm, which is going to form that food for that specific seed. Okay. So again, you have the egg cell, and then you do have the 2 haploid nuclei, which will develop into the endosperm. Again, this will help feed the seed of that plant. So seed formation, we have a plant embryo packaged with a food supply with any protective covering. Fruit is a ripened, thickened ovary of a flower. Again, that ovary or that part surrounding the ovum or the ovule is going to turn into the fruit. Okay. So again, we'll point that out. Oh, maybe this next one. Yeah, they show it right here. So this protects the dormant seeds and aids in their dispersal. So the aiding and dispersal part means the fruit development means that there's going to be an organism that comes and eats the fruit and then either poops out the seeds or drops the seeds somewhere. Okay. And that's common, right? Plants have developed, and angiosperms have developed this mechanism to incorporate mammals or other types of organisms on seed dispersal through fruit. Okay, we like fruit, we consume fruit. It makes sense to have mammals or other types of animals pick up the fruit, eat the flesh, and then dump the seed somewhere. Okay. So here we have we have the endosperm or the triploid nucleus, and then we do have a fertilized zygote right here. So again, that pollen would have to travel down the stigma down here into the ovule and then fertilize the egg. That zygote will develop into a seed. Okay, so you have multicellular hap or diploid cell here, and then the tissue around the seed again. All of this tissue, the ovule, will develop into that fruit. Okay, and so this endosperm or this double or triple nucleus again will be the fruit or the nutrients needed to develop that fruit. Okay. So here we have a pea pod fruit, holds a pea seeds, and then you have the seeds, and then you have the pod. Again, this was originally a flower shown here, right? So you have the sepals or the petals that are remnants of the old flower, and then you have the development of the fruit, okay? So fruit is anything that contains a seed. That includes tomatoes, cucumbers, um, what else? Let me see. I'm thinking of things or fruit that people always call vegetables. Squash, that's another one too, right? Pumpkins, those are all going to be fruit. Okay? Anything with a seed that contains that fleshy ovary around it is going to be a fruit. Okay. So all of these are fruits, which we pretty much know. They don't have tomatoes here, but bananas are a fruit as well. Again, they do have seeds. Dry fruits, which are nuts. Okay. So seed germination in a garden, after a seed takes up water, it bursts out of its coat and begins to grow. And again, some of those dry seeds are a little bit easier to picture, right? So these are considered dry seeds or dry fruits. And the fleshy fruits are going to be a little bit different, right? For grapes, you have to consume that flesh, or that flesh needs to rot away before the seeds expose. And same thing with the apple, or these peaches, or the mango, or the pineapple, right? um, there needs to be that flesh, or the ovary needs to be removed away from that seed in order for this to germinate, in order for the seed to be exposed. Okay. But here you have the development of the seed. Again, it needs to have favorable conditions, proper light, proper water. Otherwise, the seed will lie dormant and will not germinate. Okay. And eventually it sprouts and grows. And remember, we talked about the cotyledons. Either it's a dicot or monocot. So again, this is going to be the dicot with two cotyledons. Okay. Again, here we have the bean, or the growth of the bean plant. All right. So for your assignment, you're going to draw a picture of your favorite flower and label the parts. Stamen style set. I guess that should be stigma. The image should be uploaded as either PDF or JPEG format. You have until this Friday to complete the assignment. So I'll show you where that is actually now, just so we can all visualize that. So again, I actually uploaded this assignment to week 16, so it's pretty easy, 10 points. So you're just gonna draw and then upload. So you can take a picture using your phone, but just change it. So if you would like, I would recommend taking the picture, and then your picture is gonna be high quality. So if you have like an iPhone, or even and Androids might not have problems with this, but iPhones probably will have problems, especially if one of those moving pictures. If you screenshot the still picture of that and then upload that, that should be fine. If not, either send an email to yourself and see if it shows up in your email once you send it to yourself through your phone, and then it should be converted. But PDF or JPEG would be the preferred image. Okay. If not, if you're having some issues, if it's uploading, I'm unable to see it, I'll send you an email, or you can let me know if you're having issues with that. Okay. But should be fairly simple. Okay. And then I'll be uploading another assignment today with those 5 questions, which 2 of them will be on your exam this Thursday. Okay. But I'll start the review right now. So again, I'm going through chapter 25, 26, and 27. The first half of 28 will be on your exam, but I will not cover it today just to save us some lecture time. So I'm probably going to spill over the hour right now going through the review. Okay, so here's some key things for chapter 25, hormones, you need to remember. Okay, So remember, in the endocrine system, hormone and target cells. So remember, the endocrine system is going to be the chemical component to the talking of your cells, right? We talked about the electrical, which is the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and then now we're going back to the hormones or the chemical talking. Okay, so one of the main things that we need to talk about is the endocrine gland, right? Which is either the thyroid, the pituitary, the hypothalamus. You have your adrenal glands, you have your pancreas, right? And all of those organs or all that those endocrine glands are going to be talking to one another in order to maintain homeostasis. Okay, so it's going to be one of the key things to understand about the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, and your hormones or your endocrine system, right? So this is going to be your tissues and your cells talking to one another in order to maintain a homeostatic normal, okay, with your body. Okay, so hormone, it can either be a lipid or a non-lipid hormone, right? So either protein or some sort of fat. Okay, so some sort of cholesterol-based hormone. And we talked about soluble versus non-soluble, water soluble versus non-water soluble hormones. The fat is not going to be water soluble, right? We talked about fat being non-polar. The androgen or the estrogens, the testosterone, the progesterones, those sex hormones are not going to be water soluble, right? They're going to look like cholesterol. There's two different mechanisms of how they enter the cell and how they talk to your cell. Okay. Another thing, target cells. The endocrine system targets multiple cells using one type of hormone, right? Um, for example, testosterone. Testosterone can talk to multiple different tissues and multiple different organ systems. Okay, it can cause your muscles to grow. Right? We talked about steroid abuse and androgen steroid abuse. So those hormones can talk to your muscles, tell them to grow. They can also talk to your brain and cause different mood changes or swings. It can also talk to your hair follicles or your skin cells, right? Causing you to grow hair or lose hair. Okay, it can also talk to your skin or your apocrine glands, causing you to secrete or sweat more. Okay, so one hormone may have multiple target cells. Okay, so it's something that's important to know. One hormone might target multiple different organ systems or multiple different tissues and have different reactions for each cell type. Okay, so it's another important thing to know. All right. So how do hormones work? Again, there's two types of hormones. There's water soluble, such as EPO or glucose or insulin or glucagon. Those are all going to be water soluble. Or you have lipid soluble hormones, which are estrogen or progesterones or testosterone. Okay. So remember, water. If they're water soluble, think dipole. If they're lipid soluble, think oil soluble. Okay. So oil and water do not mix. Okay. So here we have a water soluble hormone. They're going to bind to a protein receptor. Okay, so this is going to be binding to something that's on the outside of the cell. Remember, the plasma membrane is a phospholipid bilayer, meaning the lipid bilayer is in between. Okay, so this is a non-polar region of that cell. So you're going to have fat or non-polar areas within that plasma membrane, which means that the water soluble hormone cannot pass through. Whereas in a lipid hormone can definitely pass through that lipid bilayer. So it's just going to come right into the cell and then attach to a protein receptor and then have gene regulation there. Okay. So either production or non-production of certain hormone or certain proteins after the exposure to that lipid soluble hormone. And again, these are going to be mainly the androgen hormones, so testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Okay. And again, um, those hormones take a while to kind of take an effect on the body. Okay. Endocrine gland. So we should know the couple of endocrine glands, right? Hypothalamus, pituitary, your testes, pancreas, and the adrenal glands. Okay. Hypothalamus connects to the pituitary gland, so that anterior pituitary is actually a portion of the hypothalamus. Okay. So I'm sorry, the posterior pituitary is actually an extension of the hypothalamus. The anterior secretes two hormones, whereas the posterior secretes a lot of different hormones. Okay. Um, Yeah, it can be all those. But so the anterior produces the follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing, growth hormone, prolactin. So a lot of different hormones are produced here. Posterior produces oxytocin, which is that euphoric hormone, again with touch and association with mother and child nurturing. Okay, vasopressin is going to be one of the hormones that's going to be used for controlling your blood pressure, okay, and the amount of liquid you have in your body. All right. Whereas the anterior pituitary kind of controls a lot of different functions. Okay. Posterior, really only two: the love hormone right here, or the euphoric hormone, and the vasopressin, which is controlling your blood pressure and your water. Okay. Growth hormone, we talked about giantism and dwarfism. This can be controlled by the pituitary gland. Again, this has happened with individuals that have severe trauma to the pituitary or a tumor growth. So sometimes you'll see this after a car accident where the nose or the bridge of the nose gets pushed into the pituitary gland. You have tissue damage to the pituitary, um, producing abnormally high amounts of growth hormone, or you can have damage or a tumor that's going to limit the amount of growth hormone that's being produced. Okay. We talked about thyroid and hyper and hypothyroidism. Okay. So it's a negative feedback loop. Okay. So thyroid stimulating hormone um, increases the thyroid hormone. This affects metabolic rate, blood pressure, heart rate, and tolerance to cold, right? So thyroid hormone inhibits thyroid stimulating hormone, okay? Um, so you want one or the other, and they need to be in a balance in order to produce that normal um, thyroid functioning, okay? So hyperthyroidism, we'll start with hypo since it's first. Hypothyroidism is low thyroid hormone, increases thyroid stimulating hormone production. Okay, so low thyroid hormone will increase or allow this thyroid stimulating hormone to be produced in excess. Okay, so too much of this and then not enough of this will give you hypothyroidism. So too much TSH, not enough thyroid hormone will give you hypothyroidism. Okay, this can cause goiter. This can cause weight gain, tiredness, slowed heart rate, and intolerance to cold. So lack of iodine in a diet can cause this issue. Hashimoto's disease is an autoimmune disease that is caused by the body's immune system actively attacking the thyroid gland as well. Okay, so treatment either is iodine or you supplement the thyroid stimulating hormone or the thyroid hormone. Sorry. So either you treat by giving thyroid hormone or you give iodine to prevent that goiter from occurring. Okay. Sometimes the thyroid can be damaged severely by this disease. Also, you can have thyroid cancer, and then you would have artificial hormones given. So normalizing the thyroid hormone. Okay. Hyperthyroidism is the overproduction of thyroid hormone, which is characterized by weight loss, high blood pressure, rapid heart rate, and increased sensitivity to heat. Treatment is radioactive iodine, which essentially kills off the thyroid. Okay. Um, Potassium iodine pills are used as well for treatment against radioactive fallout. So this potassium iodine is going to be reacting to the radioactive iodine that's found in the environment upon exposure of either a nuclear event, a nuclear fallout event. Okay, so they prescribed this to individuals that were in Japan during the natural disaster event, as well as in Chernobyl. Okay, they had potassium iodine pills on hand readily for those individuals who were exposed. Okay, because radioactive iodine is quite common, and again, radioactive iodine or iodine in general is concentrated in the thyroid. Again, this can cause some issues. Okay, so again, blood and glucose. We talked about two hormones, insulin and glucagon. They're both secreted by the pancreas. These are water-soluble hormones. Insulin induces your body to pull the sugar from your bloodstream into your cells, whereas glucagon will trigger your cells to dump the sugar into your bloodstream in order for your body to regulate or pick up that glucose. Okay, so one is antagonistic to the other. Okay, glucagon again is going to raise sugar levels in the blood, whereas insulin lowers the levels in your blood. Okay. And you either have type 1 or type 2 diabetes, or you can have gestational diabetes as well, which we talked about. Type 1 meaning you lack the cells that produce insulin. Type 2 meaning you've destroyed or somehow mismanaged, or your body mismanaged those cells in your pancreas. So you once had the ability to produce insulin. Okay. Yeah, you can look at that on your own. Diabetes mellitus, again, yeah, you can read through this. It's fine. I already explained that. Measuring blood glucose. Again, there's monitors. Adrenal glands, epinephrine, norepinephrine are going to be both fight or flight inducing hormones. Fight or flight. Again, they're going to be right over the kidneys that can dump right into the bloodstream. Okay. Epinephrine is going to be what's given to you in an EpiPen if you have an allergy. Again, this is inducing a flight or fight response, which means you're shutting down your immune system. Okay. Which is key. It's important, right? You're stopping the anaphylactic shock because you're telling your body where there's an immediate danger. The immune system needs to stop working for a minute so you can run away or fight. Okay. That's all essentially epinephrine is doing. Okay. It's again triggering that fight or flight response, stopping the immune system from causing the allergic reaction or the anaphylactic shock. Okay. Corticosteroids, one of the families you want to synthesize adrenal cortex. So there's corticosteroids again are important as well. This is what's released after running or working out. Again, helps with stress response. So it's a cortisol response essentially. Okay. Too much cortisol, not good, but you do need a release of this hormone in small amounts. Okay. And we talked about sex hormones, gonads, so estrogen, progesterone, and then testosterone. Okay. We talked about cancers that are sensitive to hormones. Okay. Prescribing people with breast cancer that have or tamoxifen. Again, this is going to help slow the cancer cells from growing. Again, if they are positive for those specific receptors. So sometimes you'll hear about HR negative, HER2 positive. Okay, those are going to be those different receptors on the outside of those cancer cells. They're going to use those receptors to regulate those cells. One of them is going to be hormone based, okay? And then that's going to allow for the regulation of that cancer cell based on either estrogen receptors or cutting that estrogen away, not allowing for those cancer cells to divide. Okay. Sometimes you'll see this with women that also take what is it? I can't even think of the word right now. You'll see at times with women that take what is it? I can't think of the medication. When they can't have children, they're taking medicines that'll allow. They're taking hormones to make them have a baby. What is it called? I can't think of the name. But sometimes those medicines or those types of hormone treatments are also pretty are bad for the mother as well because they can actually trigger cancer cell growth sometimes. So you'll see either like ovarian cyst or you'll see breast cell cancer development sometimes with those individuals. Why can't I think of the name? It was off the tip of my tongue. Not prenatal. Thinking of something else. It'll come to me later. But yeah, cancer regulation with hormones. All right, chapter 26. Human reproduction. So know the terms fertilization, zygote. Know why we have sex, right? This is going to be a mix-up of genetic information. Human reproduction, the gonad. Know the terms, okay? Know what belongs in a male, what belongs in a female. Know about the vas deferens. Males only have prostate glands. Okay, this organ makes up the majority of the ejaculatory fluid. Okay, be able to identify the key parts, right? So be able to identify the vas deferens, be able to identify the epididymis, which are the sperm, the testicle. You should be able to identify the prostate and the bladder, as well as the seminal vesicles. Just the key components. Okay. Same thing with the female reproductive anatomy. Okay. So know the different terms. So vagina, hymen, clitoris, ovary. Actually, don't really need to worry about the hymen. I won't ask you about that. But ovary, follicle, clitoris, vagina. Know about ovulation, the corpus luteum, oviduct, uterus, endometrium, which is going to be that inner layer in the uterus that allows for attachment of the fertilized egg. Definitely know about the cervix. We talked about this with HPV and cervical cancers. Okay, know and be able to identify it. Okay, so again, you have the uterus here. You have that ovary, the oviduct. Again, you have the cervix. This is an area where you typically get screened from your pap smear for irregular cells from HPV. You have the vagina or the vaginal opening. Then you have the anus just behind. And then you do have the smaller urethra, right? We've also talked about women having issues are more prone to developing urinary tract infections, again, because of the smaller or the shorter urethra, okay? Yeah, that's pretty much it. We'll hear you the clitoris as well. This is going to be the same and structure in terms of, well, I guess it's not the same structure, but it's analogous to the human or to the male penis. Okay, so you're going to have the stimulation or the nerves here. Okay, during sex. So the corpus luteum again is going to be releasing the egg. This is going to be that swollen development in the ovary during ovulation. That's going to release the egg. You have the oviduct where the sperm actually meets the egg and is fertilized, and then you have the implantation in the uterus. Okay, so the endometrium or the lining of the uterus will be full of blood and vessels ready for that egg to implant. Okay, if no egg implants, you then have your period or menstruation, and then you have the shedding or the lining of the endometrium. Okay, and that'll be the blood during the period. Okay, or during the menstruation. Okay, and again, here's the cervix. So be able to identify those structures. So gametogenesis and spermatogenesis and oogenesis. So gametogenesis, formation of gametes within the gonads. Again, you'll see this with sperm. In females, this occurs before birth. Females have all the eggs they need for their whole life already at birth, whereas males continually produce until they die. Okay. It's not 100% in males. After about age, I think 35 or 30, depending on like the vitality of the male, your sperm count does go down. So you're not as, you don't produce as much sperm as you did when you're 20s or your late teens, right? So men will typically age and then not produce as much sperm. Females, once you're done producing eggs, you're done. So you will not have a period anymore. And then you go through menopause, which is going to be the loss of the change of hormones after the halting of the egg production, okay? Or the release of the egg, rather. So oogenesis, or formation of egg cells within the ovaries. Again, this is done at birth, okay? So you have all the eggs you're ever going to need, okay? This is showing spermatogenesis. Okay, so you have a 2N diploid cell. Again, meiosis occurs. So there's meiosis 1 and 2. And then you have the development of those sperm cells. Again, you have the acrosome, you have the flagellum. It takes about 65 to 75 days in a mature male, okay, to produce the sperm. Okay. Oogenesis in females. Again, you have the 2N diploid cell, you have meiosis 1 and 2. You have a polar body that is removed, and then eventually you'll have the fertilization again in the oviduct. Okay, so the follicle or the corpus luteum is going to be what is grown or what is inflamed after the ovulated egg leaves that follicle, and that corpus luteum is what's going to be producing the hormones in order to trigger either implantation, right, the progesterone for implantation of the zygote, or that fertilized egg, or it'll trigger the period, okay? Or the menstruation. So reproductive cycle, ovarian cycle, menstrual cycle. So again, the synchronizing of hormones. So again, the hormones are going to be controlled by the follicle as well as the corpus luteum. Okay. So again, you'll have the ovulation. So you have your luteinizing hormone, the peak, which triggers ovulation. Okay. So progesterone or estrogen secreted by the remnant of the follicle. And then again, you'll have the degeneration of the corpus luteum. And then you'll have the upkick in the hormone. So the progesterone. Okay. So after, or progesterone, sorry, progestin is going to be that artificial progesterone in birth control. So again, you'll have the development of the endometrium, getting ready for the baby to be implanted or that zygote. You have a peak in the luteinizing hormone or estrogen, which is during ovulation. Once the corpus luteum has released the egg, then you have the upkick in progesterone. Okay, and this is what's going to trigger either the implantation or you have your menstrual cycle. Okay, and then it'll continue here. So at the end of this, it just starts here. You have the deterioration in your menstrual cycle. All right, so your ovulation, I think I mentioned this. I don't know if it wrote it down. So 2 weeks before your period, you do have your ovulation. Okay, so at 14-day mark, before your period, you're ovulating. Okay. So we talked about contraception, so vasectomy, tube ligation, intrauterine device. So I've actually read a couple of different things on the intrauterine devices. Most of them are hormonal now. I think they stopped using, or they stopped recommending the use of the copper intrauterine devices or the IUDs. Okay, because there's been having some issues with that, with scarring in the uterus, and then infections, various different things like that. So I know I mentioned the copper IUDs, but more literature has come out saying that they're going to stop use of the IUDs as much. Okay, but they're still on the market. People still are using them, but they're recommending against them now. Most of the hormone contraceptions are going to be, or most of the contraceptions now, the intrauterine devices are going to be hormonal. Okay, like the ring. You have the ring now. Birth control pill. This is probably the oldest hormonal based treatment. Again, it's either estrogen or progesterone, which is going to be mimicking the menstrual cycle of the female. Okay. Condoms, spermicidal lube. So this is natural family planning is going to be using a calendar. This is typical with certain cultural groups or certain religious groups that'll use this in order to prevent the use of chemical or hormonal based treatments. Okay. There's also a morning after pill. Again, this does not abort the child. This essentially gives you a rush of hormones in order to induce menstruation. Okay. But if there's an implantation, that child is going to be, or that zygote or the implanted egg is going to already be producing hormones and already implanted. And therefore it's going to be producing its own hormones and then limiting whether or not it's going to work. Okay. So sexually transmitted infections, I do want you to know a couple of them: chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis. I think we talked about HPV and cervical cancers, or this is HIV, sorry, but HPV as well. I don't think they even have HPV on here. Okay. So you have chlamydia, bacterial, Neisseria bacterial, treponema bacterial, Candida albicans is going to be yeast or eukaryotic fungal infection. Trichomonas vaginalis or trichomonas is going to be a protist, and then HPV right here, and then herpes simplex virus. Okay. the label of a sperm. So acrosome is going to break through that first initial layer on the egg, and then the nucleus again is going to fuse with the female nucleus. You have the mitochondrial. Mitochondria is going to help produce the energy needed for the flagellum to work. Okay, and this is going to swim. One of the few flagellated cells in the human body. Okay, so again, that acrosome is going to be used to break through that jelly coat. Once the acrosome eats away at the jelly coat, it'll fuse and cause all the other sperm that are trying to enter that egg cell. Again, you see all the sperm trying to enter the egg cell. Once it fuses, it kind of kicks all the other cells away. You have the fusion, and now you have a zygote. Okay. Let's see. Fertilization occurs in the oviduct, and the implantation occurs in the uterus. Okay, so this is an endometrium, and then the implantation. Remember, this is going to be full and ready to go, full of blood and vascularity. That's going to allow for the nutrients to be given to that child, that zygote, the fertilized egg. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, this is. Yeah, that's fine. That's enough. Okay. Last chapter. So nervous system. There's a lot on here. There's about 54 slides, so there's gonna be a lot of information. I'll try to rush through. Sorry, I'm going over my time. So nervous, sensory, and locomotive system. So nervous system, again, be able to define these, know the directionality. So be able to identify a dendrite and an axon. Okay. You're also going to need to identify the myelin sheathing and understand why this is important. Remember, this is like insulation. Think of this as plastic over electrical wire. If you don't have that plastic, that wire is not going to function properly. Okay. So the dendrites require innervation of other synaptic terminals. So multiple synapses are going to be bound or touching the dendrites that are going to trigger a response, that are going to send a signal through its own axon. Okay, so the dendrites are touching multiple synaptic terminals, but this one nerve cell is going to only have one synaptic terminal. Okay, so there's two. I guess we'll get there when we get there. So the CSN, again, this is going to be the central nervous system. It's going to be the brain and the spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system is everything else. Okay. So we talked about the integration versus the output. So sensory input should be integrated for a motor output. Okay. So we have the parasympathetic nervous system as well. That's going to be triggered naturally, that you don't have any control over. But for the most part, you have an input and then you have an output. But the in between is going to be that CSN. Okay, so that brain and that spinal cord is going to be talking to everything else. Okay, so again, CSN to the PSN, the peripheral nervous system. Okay, action potential. So you understand how nerves are fired. Again, we think of this as an electrical chemical potential. Again, this changing or flipping of the charges or the poles is going to induce that electrical signal. Okay. So again, positive goes in or goes out, causing the transduction of that electrical signal. So you have a resting potential, positive on the outside, negative on the inside. A stimulus opens up the first set of ion channels if the threshold is reached, and action potential is triggered. So boom, you have the changing of the charges. So this triggers an electrical charge to move down the action potential, right? So this is going to be in the axon. That myelin sheathing, or those cells that insulate the axon, are going to allow for the electrical signal to travel much quicker. Okay. So all those electrical signals need to do is travel. I think it's here. Yeah. Travel between these spots. So that triggering or the positive and negative shift is going to induce an electrical charge. So boom, it'll travel really rapidly here. It'll induce another charge. Boom, travel, 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 travel. If this was not insulated, if this was not able to contract or move that electrical signal down due to the fact that there's no insulation, then you will not produce an electrical signal. So you need these cells, the myelin sheathing or these Schwann cells present in order to have that electrical signal. Okay. So those cells are very important for the transduction and movement of that action potential. Okay. So again, each of these little bits or each of these spaces is going to be housed, is going to be housing a cell, a Schwann cell. Okay, that's going to be that myelin sheathing or that insulation that's going to allow for that electrical charge to travel down the axon. Okay. All right. So the neurotransmitter is going to be what's secreted at the ends of the synapses. So here we have the neurotransmitter. So this is an action potential being reached. Then you have the dumping of the neurotransmitter to a dendrite. Okay. So this is another neuron. So this is a dendritic cell or site of a neuron. So here you have the dendritic portion of that neuron receiving typically the neurotransmitter is acetylcholine, and this is going to either induce a response or another cell to trigger the action potential, right? So multiple synaptic terminals need to touch this dendritic portion of the neuron in order to induce the action potential. Okay, so there's a threshold that needs to be reached, right? The threshold is not reached, then you don't have the transduction of the electrical signal. Okay. So know those definitions. Be able to identify the brain, the meninges, the brain stem as well. Okay. So know the difference between the autonomic, okay, and the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is involuntary control. Okay, so this is going to be regulating the internal environment, breathing, digestion, right? Whereas parasympathetic is going to be rest and digest, or sympathetic is going to be fight and flight. Okay, so autonomic without your control. Okay, and then you have parasympathetic and sympathetic. So parasympathetic, rest and digest, sympathetic, fight or flight. So think of this as the adrenal glands that are controlling the body in order to induce energy or movement. Okay, parasympathetic, rest and digest. Okay, be able to identify these different areas. I might ask you to identify or tell me what that area of the brain does. Okay, so these are the simple definitions that you need to know. Okay, that one that. Okay, corpus callosum connects the two halves of the brain together. Okay, this is also a good thing to study. I'll probably ask a few questions. Don't worry about this. Well, I guess worry about this a little bit in terms of neuroplasticity. Okay, so being able, your brain to being able to compensate for the loss of a portion. Okay, so you see this with neuroplasticity. So the brain being able to learn or form new junctions or new connections. Okay. So this is again hemispherectomy, which is going to be the removal of one half of the brain. This is caused by a patient who most likely had severe seizures. Okay. Depression, disease, taste. Okay, so there's different types of receptors. We have chemoreceptors as well as light receptors or photoreceptors. Again, there's different types of receptors. You have heat, light, touch, pain, cold. Be able to identify the areas in the eye, so know where the light is being received. So the photoreceptors are going to be housed in the retina, and the retina is going to be that tissue just behind the lens. Okay, so behind the eye, we do have a blind spot. Okay, that's one of the things that I want you to know as well. Due to our evolutionary past, the eye developed and then was innervated by a nerve ending. Okay, so whereas mollusks or squid do not have that, they don't have a blind spot. Okay. Yeah, the sclera, just be able to identify the various, so the iris, pupil, lens, definitely be able to identify the retina. Again, the retina is going to be housing the cones and the light sensitive cells. Okay. So again, the rods and the cones, this is going to be housed in the retina, okay, behind the eye. Okay. Again, the rod and the cones again, and then you have the innervation of the optic nerve that's going to be receiving the signals from the cones and the rods. So photoreceptors and the neurons are going to make up that retinal layer. Hearing, be able to identify the cochlea, or it looks like a snail. Again, this is going to be receiving the vibrations that are going to be made from the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Again, this is going to be the movement or the shaking that's going to cause us to hear or actually understand the noise, okay? And this is going to travel, again, to those neurons here. So yeah, be able to identify the structures, some skeletal system. So be able to identify the major bones. Okay, so just the big ones. So radius, ulna, humerus, skull, vertebrae. I'm not going to ask you to identify like lumbar, thoracic, or cervical. I just want you to be able to identify the bone. Okay, so if I give you a little diagram like this, you'll be able to identify it. Okay, don't worry about the metatarsals or the tarsals or the carpals. Okay, so just the major bones. Okay, know the different joints. So ball and socket, hinge, pivot. Okay. I might ask you to identify the bones that are associated. So this is, again, the humerus and the scapula, okay? Humerus and the ulna, hinge joint, or I would ask you to identify which joints are which. Bone, again, yellow bone marrow is fat. You do have spongy bone versus compact bone. Different. Identify some of the diseases we talked about. So in terms of the muscle, I do want you to understand the thick versus thin filaments. Thin filaments move, the thick filaments do not. Remember, a muscle that's halfway contracted is much stronger than a muscle that's fully extended and then trying to contract. Okay. So this is much stronger at contracting than this. Again, because you do have those thick actin or myosin heads binding to the actin. And this is induced by ATP, right? So this binding and moving is induced by ATP. If you don't have the binding or the movement, again, you're going to have issues. If someone dies or passes away, you don't produce no more ATP, then rigor mortis sets in, and this is going to stop the movement of the head or the myosin and actin from binding to each other, okay? So ATP is used to remove that head and cock it back. So if you die, you lack the ATP. Again, this is going to mean that you cannot unbind the myosin and actin, okay? The myosin head to the actin filament, okay? So that's why rigor mortis sets in. You're stuck. You're stiff once you die. You don't produce no more ATP. Then you lack the ability to remove that myosin head, okay? This is just referring to motor neuron. Okay, and that's it. Sorry, I know I went over. Any questions? And again, I'll be uploading that assignment. It's going to be 5 questions. 2 of them will be on the exam. No questions? Okay. I will stop.